What happens when the one man trying to save a regime gets thrown out by the very regime he is trying to save? Something extraordinary just took place inside Iran, and the world barely noticed. A powerful figure at the center of the most critical talks in Iran's modern history was quietly removed. No announcement, no press briefing, no explanation given to the Iranian public. He was simply gone. And the reason he was pushed out tells you more about the future of this conflict than any headline you have read this week. If you care about where this is all heading, hit the like button right now, subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this, and share this with one person who needs to understand what is really happening in Iran. This is the kind of story that gets buried under noise. Let us pull it apart together. So who was this man, and why does his removal matter so much? His name is Ghalibaf. He is the Speaker of the Iranian parliament. That alone makes him one of the most senior figures in the Iranian government. But the role that made him truly significant was not his parliamentary position. It was his seat at the negotiating table. He was Iran's lead voice in the talks with Washington. He was the man personally engaging with American officials over the most consequential diplomatic process the Islamic Republic has ever faced. And he was removed not from parliament, not from his government titles, but specifically from the negotiating team. From that one role, the role that matters most right now. That precision tells you everything. He was not removed because he did something wrong in the eyes of the outside world. He was removed because he did something that threatened powerful people inside Iran. Specifically, he was attempting to include the nuclear issue in the talks with Washington. He was trying to put the one subject on the table that the United States has made crystal clear is the minimum requirement for any deal. He was trying to negotiate the only thing that could actually end this crisis, and for that, he was pushed out. Think about what that means for a moment. Iran is in the middle of a military and economic conflict it is clearly losing. Oil is piling up in storage ships with nowhere to go. Soldiers are reportedly sharing ammunition rations so small they barely cover one person. The supreme leader is communicating with the outside world through handwritten notes passed to motorcycle couriers because digital communication is considered too risky. In the middle of all of that, the man who was actually trying to reach a deal was removed by the people who do not want one. The organization responsible for his removal is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They control roughly 30 to 40% of Iran's economy. They dominate the country's military apparatus, and during wartime, they hold authority that bleeds into civilian governance in ways that are not always visible from the outside. For the IRGC, the nuclear program is not simply a weapon, it is the institutional justification for everything they are. The leverage, the power, the budget, the authority. A nuclear concession would not just end military pressure, it would remove the central reason the IRGC gets to operate the way it does. So when Ghalibaf started moving toward a nuclear discussion, the IRGC saw it as a direct threat to their existence. They moved against him, and they won. Now comes the part that makes this even more alarming. The name being discussed as his replacement is Saeed Jalili. If you are not familiar with that name, here is what you need to know. During the period when the tension between IRGC hardliners and civilian negotiators became public, Jalili posted a message on social media that was so extreme it was deleted within an hour. He called the civilian negotiators coup plotters. He openly questioned whether the supreme leader supported them. And then he added something extraordinary. He suggested that if those coup plotters were not dealt with, IRGC soldiers would have to handle them personally. That post was deleted. But deleting a post does not erase the thinking behind it. It does not walk back the faction that cheered when they read it. And now the man who wrote those words may be the one sitting across the table from American negotiators. Let that sink in. Washington would no longer be negotiating with someone trying to find a path to agreement. It would be negotiating with someone who built his political identity around preventing one. Every compromise the civilian side was willing to consider becomes something Jalili's faction has publicly condemned as betrayal. Every moderate step becomes, in his framing, the work of people who deserve to be removed by force. What does a negotiation look like when the man leading it has threatened to eliminate his predecessor for being too willing to talk? It looks like the last stop before the next phase of violence begins. And yet, even as all of this is unfolding, talks are restarting. After a pause of roughly 2 days, flights are moving. The foreign minister is in the air. Pakistani mediators are preparing. American envoys are getting ready to travel. On the surface, this looks like progress, but the surface is deceptive here. What is actually happening is 2 different power centers inside Iran moving forward at the same time, in opposite directions, neither able to fully stop the other. The civilian foreign ministry is still trying to find a deal. The IRGC is still trying to prevent one. Both are in motion simultaneously. And slowly, quietly, the IRGC is winning the internal war for control. Now here is where the story gets even more layered. To understand why this internal battle is so hard to resolve, you have to understand the condition of the one man who is supposed to be above all of it, the supreme leader. His physical situation is far more serious than what has been publicly acknowledged. He suffered injuries during strikes that killed his father. His legs were badly damaged, badly enough that he has undergone 3 surgeries in 2 months. Doctors have reportedly concluded that a prosthetic will likely be necessary. His face and lips sustained severe burns. There are reports that he may require plastic surgery before he can make any public appearance at all. For any leader, this would be serious. For the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, it is something much more than a health crisis. His authority depends on visibility, on presence, on being the figure whose voice and image carry the weight of divine mandate in the public imagination. A leader who cannot appear in public, who cannot speak clearly, who must communicate through handwritten notes passed to motorcycle riders who carry them back and forth between locations, is a leader whose grip on power has structural limits that no title can fix. The inner circle around him has apparently shifted to a board model. Major decisions require something close to unanimous agreement from the senior figures around him, and those senior figures increasingly include IRGC commanders who have positioned themselves close to the center. They shape what information reaches the supreme leader. They influence which options are even presented to him. They are part of the vote that produces his decisions. A leader who receives filtered information, who communicates by courier, and who depends medically and logistically on the institution that opposes the one outcome the situation requires, is not truly in a position to override that institution. Not right now. This is the decision-making structure that is supposed to produce a nuclear concession, a governance architecture where the man at the top is physically incapacitated, informationally dependent on the hardliners, and communicating with the speed of a pre-industrial messenger system. That is not a system capable of forcing the IRGC to accept something the IRGC is determined to resist. All right, if this breakdown is giving you a clearer picture than what you have been seeing in the news, do something about it. Drop a comment below with just the word Iran so I know you are following this. Share this video with your group chats, and if you are not subscribed yet, now is the moment. Hit that button, because what comes next in this story is going to matter enormously, and you need to be here when it does. While all of this is happening inside Iran, the military picture outside Iran has reached a scale not seen in this region in more than 20 years. 3 American carrier strike groups are now operating simultaneously in the Middle East: the USS Abraham Lincoln, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the USS George H.W. Bush, 3 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in the same theater at the same time. The last time that happened was 2003, during the invasion of Iraq. Together, their flight decks carry more than 200 aircraft. Combined, they are supported by over 15,000 sailors and Marines, and the way they are positioned is deliberate. One in the Red Sea, sealing the southern approach. One in the Arabian Sea, enforcing the blockade line. One in the Indian Ocean, moving to close the remaining gap. Any response launched from Iran in any direction runs into air defense coverage from at least one carrier group before it can reach its intended target. There is a language to carrier deployments that military analysts read carefully. One carrier says, "We are present." 2 carriers says, "We are ready for escalation." 3 carriers says, "We are prepared to end this on our terms if the talks fail." 3 carriers is not a warning, it is a statement made in hardware, not words. And hardware at that scale, in that configuration, does not get assembled and then quietly sent home without either being used or producing the outcome it was positioned to achieve. The blockade has already started producing visible results. 34 ships reached the blockade line and turned around rather than risk being stopped. 1 did not turn around. That ship is now under American control, but the deeper impact of the blockade is not the ships being turned away. It is what is happening to Iran's oil. Iran cannot export its oil through the blockade, but it also does not want to shut down its oil fields. The reason is simple and brutal. Shutting in wells, especially in aging fields that have already suffered years of underinvestment, causes permanent damage. Some percentage of that production capacity never comes back. You cannot just flip the switch back on and resume normal operations. Some of the wells are gone, and restoring them requires capital investment on a scale that a sanctioned regime under military pressure cannot access. So Iran has chosen a third path. Decommissioned tankers, ships that had been retired from service, are being brought back out and loaded with Iranian crude. They float in port or in the Gulf, carrying oil that has nowhere to go. waiting for a resolution that allows the blockade to lift and exports to resume. But that storage capacity is not infinite, it is filling up, and when it fills completely, the choice becomes binary. Shut the wells and accept permanent production loss while revenue collapses, or find a deal before the tanks fill. That is not a metaphor, that is a calendar, and the calendar moves whether the IRGC wants to negotiate or not. The IRGC feels this particular pressure in a very direct way. They depend on oil revenue to pay their own people, the soldiers at checkpoints, the militia enforcers, the networks of people whose loyalty is maintained by regular payment. When the payments become irregular, those loyalties begin to recalculate. Not overnight, not all at once, but with a momentum that, once started, is very hard to stop. The IRGC commanders know this because they saw what happened in January, when economic pressure pushed hundreds of thousands into the streets. They know what happens when financial shock reaches the people currently being paid to suppress the next round of protests. The storage countdown is ultimately the countdown to that moment. This is why the foreign minister got on a plane. But where he is going is as interesting as the fact that he is going at all. The itinerary has 3 stops. Pakistan first, where the formal talks have been held and are expected to resume. That makes sense. That is expected. Oman second. Oman sits on the southern shore of the Strait of Hormuz, the same strait Iran has been using as its primary strategic instrument. Oman has historically maintained closer ties with Iran than almost any other Gulf state. This visit is almost certainly about the strait itself. Iran has floated ideas about joint management of the waterway. If Iran is looking for a framework that converts the strait from a blunt weapon into a piece of negotiated leverage, the country on the other shore is the natural first conversation. Russia third. And this is the stop with the most significant operational possibilities. When the 2015 nuclear deal was finalized, Iran transferred a substantial portion of its highly enriched uranium to Russia as part of the agreement. Russia had the enrichment infrastructure, the storage capacity, and the willingness to hold that material. The transfer removed the immediate threat, created precedent, and demonstrated that the logistics of moving Iranian uranium to Russian custody actually work. The relationship on this specific issue exists. The template was executed successfully once before. If Iran is exploring a framework that involves surrendering or transferring its enriched uranium stockpile, Russia is the most obvious and most willing destination. A foreign minister traveling to Moscow in the middle of ceasefire negotiations, immediately after a hardliner consolidation of the negotiating team, could be exploring whether Russia would receive the uranium again, whether that transfer could be framed in a way that gives hardliners enough political cover to accept what they cannot publicly defend as a surrender, whether Moscow would offer any guarantee about the deal's long-term durability that might reduce IRGC fear of American re-escalation after any agreement is signed. If that Moscow conversation produces a workable framework, the path that Ghalibaf was removed for trying to open might reopen through a different door. That possibility is real. It is not guaranteed, but it is there. Running alongside all of this diplomatic movement is something the regime's public statements never directly acknowledge. Executions. A 24-year-old student connected to the January protests was executed for alleged arson he denied committing, without anything resembling a fair trial. A former employee of Iran's atomic energy organization was executed for alleged espionage on behalf of Israel, also without due process, also while denying the charges. Executions during a ceasefire. Executions of protest participants. Executions of someone connected to the nuclear program, while the foreign minister is in the air heading toward Moscow to potentially discuss that very program. These are not separate events. They are a signal from an institution that knows its strategic position is deteriorating and wants to demonstrate that it still controls the consequences of disloyalty. The message is, we are watching. We are finding you. We are removing you publicly. And everyone inside these institutions should take note. The execution of the nuclear agency employee is especially calculated. The accuracy of strikes against Iranian infrastructure throughout this conflict has been too precise to be coincidental. There is an internal security obsession inside the IRGC about penetration, about who inside the sensitive programs might be passing information outward. Executing someone from that world sends a specific message to everyone else in that world. The question the regime cannot fully answer is whether that kind of signal produces tighter security or produces the paralysis that comes from everyone fearing false accusation. Both outcomes are possible. The regime is betting on the first. History tends to produce the second, especially when fear reaches the institutions that need to function most clearly under pressure. Step back and look at the full picture that is forming right now. A top negotiator pushed out for doing his job. His potential replacement, a man who publicly threatened the previous negotiators he is now supposed to represent. A supreme leader sending decisions by motorcycle because digital communication is too traceable. A governance structure that has been quietly captured by the institution most opposed to the one outcome the situation demands. 3 American aircraft carriers in the region for the first time since 2003. 34 ships turned back at the blockade, oil-filling storage tankers that have nowhere to deliver their cargo, soldiers whose pay depends on revenue that has stopped flowing, and a foreign minister flying to Pakistan, Oman, and Moscow, carrying a negotiating position that the people behind him have just made exponentially harder to sustain. This is what panic looks like when it is managed by professionals trying not to look panicked. It is not visible in any single headline. No one statement captures it. But when you look at the full picture, the contradictions, the simultaneous movements in opposite directions, the power plays happening in real time against a collapsing economic backdrop, you see something that is not a government managing its crisis. You see a government being managed by it. The resignation is the symptom. The IRGC's tightening grip is the cause. The 3 carriers are the timeline. And somewhere in the space between a foreign minister in the air and handwritten notes being passed to motorcycle couriers, the actual answer to whether this ends with a signed agreement or with another round of strikes is being decided right now by people whose names most of the world does not know, in conversations that will not be public until after the outcome is already locked in. The version you read in most news coverage will reach you after the moment has already passed. Before you close this video, here is one thing I want you to do. Not the subscribe button, not the like. Take 30 seconds and think about one person in your life who would look at this situation differently if they understood it at this level of depth. Then send them this video. That is how this kind of analysis reaches the people who need it most. And if you want to stay inside this story as it develops, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, because the next move in this situation is coming faster than most people expect, and you are going to want to be here when it does.